There's a lot of different lifestyles in the United States Army based on where you're stationed at, what type of MOS you're doing, a lot of other factors, but there's also a different lifestyle when you're a private in the United States Army compared to when you're a sergeant in the United States Army. And really is what I'm talking about is lower enlisted, E1 through E4. What's that lifestyle like compared to E5 and up? What is that lifestyle like? Because it's very different. So that's what I'm gonna explain. That video starts right now.
Now, of course, there are some very common things, of course, that are different between being a sergeant and being a private in the Army. Of course, you're gonna make more money if you are a non-commissioned officer, if you're a sergeant compared to a private. Of course, you have more responsibilities as a sergeant compared to if you're a private. But I wanna talk about a lot of the things that maybe you weren't aware of, maybe things you're not thinking about that are different in those lifestyles. That first one being if you mess up, right? It's different if you mess up as a sergeant or an E5 and above compared to if you mess up as an E4 and below or like a private or a specialist. If you're an E4 and below, one of those lower enlisted soldiers type of thing, you mess up, sure, you're gonna get yelled at, you're gonna get in trouble, maybe a little bit for it type of thing. But at the same time, they also kind of expect you're gonna make mistakes. They think of it as a teaching point to make you better and hopefully allow you to learn from these mistakes. Depending on the severity of the mistake, of course, it's gonna get you in a lot of trouble, right? Certain other smaller ones may still even get you an ass chewing a little bit, may get you yelled at a little bit, but nonetheless, it's a learning process, right? You're new. They don't expect you to get everything right the first time, to be perfect or anything along those lines. On the other side of the house, though, as a sergeant above, they expect you to know better, right? They expect you to not make as many mistakes. They know you're not perfect to where you're gonna be not making any mistakes, but when you do make mistakes, they're gonna come down a little bit harder on you for a lot of those mistakes. As a non-commissioned officer, you're an E5, sure, maybe you're still learning, right? Maybe a little bit of leeway, but still gonna come down on you saying that, hey, you should know better, you're a non-commissioned officer, you gotta set the example for these younger soldiers type of thing. Higher up in the ranking, then it's gonna be a little bit more of a serious thing, right? Now you're a platoon sergeant, you're a first sergeant, you start making mistakes, yeah, you're gonna get a lot more trouble. They believe that you should be past the point of a learning process of still trying to figure stuff out. You should have things figured out by now. So you definitely have like a difference in, what you can get away with, what you can't get away with. You can probably get away with a lot more, right? As a non-commissioned officer, if you're late for something, you may be okay, right? They may not care too much. You'd be like, that he's busy. He's a first sergeant, so-and-so. Or there's just not people above that individual to really kind of like, yell at them for those kind of problems, type of thing. But as a lower enlisted soldier, you're still gonna get yelled at, but they also kind of expect that you're gonna kind of make some mistakes to learn from them. You've probably heard stories about how like the living conditions in like the Air Force and other branches of service are so much better than in the Army. Well, there also is a difference in living conditions based on your rank in the Army. When we're looking at like that private versus sergeant kind of lifestyle of a single soldier living in the barracks type of thing, the lifestyle is definitely better as that E5 and above, as that sergeant and above type of thing compared to those lower enlisted soldiers. Your typical Army barracks you have in modern days Army typically is where you walk into that room, you have a common area that's like a kitchenette with like a refrigerator, a bathroom type of thing, and that is shared with another roommate. But it's not like the old school days that some of my veterans may remember where it's a big ass room with maybe a bathroom in there or the bathroom's down the hall type of thing. It's usually two separate actual rooms. Those rooms have their own doors so you can secure the room and everything. You've got your space inside of there with a closet, your bed, your desk, all that kind of stuff. And you can secure that room so that way your roommate can't get into your stuff. So as a lower enlisted soldier, you're gonna be in those barracks and you're probably gonna have a roommate. There might be some situations where you don't have a roommate because, that soldier that did live in that room, PCS, went to another duty station, got out of the Army, whatever the case was, ranked up or whatever. But otherwise, most commonly, you're gonna have a roommate unless you're in that situation where your roommate just hasn't been replaced. But as a non-commissioned officer, at least as an E5 and an E6, so in the Army, a sergeant and a staff sergeant, in the barracks, you're gonna commonly have your own room. Some barracks may be set up differently. Some barracks may have the style to where they have like just one big open room that's got the kitchenette with the bathroom, and then an open space room, not two separate rooms, and those are dedicated for NCO rooms. That way an NCO lives in that room, doesn't have to share that space with anybody, and has their own space. Other situations where they just have the same uniformity of the same style rooms where it still has those two room setup, but the NCOs end up with both of those rooms to themselves. In those cases, I've seen it where sometimes the NCO has it where one room set up as a cool living room kind of area, or maybe they use it for just storage type of thing. And then their other room is like got their bed and all their other kind of stuff to actually have their living space inside of there. There might be some like select situations where an NCO might get stuck with another NCO where you got those two rooms kind of set up and one's an NCO and the other one's an NCO. But then you're still having to share that bathroom and that kitchenette. And they usually try to avoid that because you're an NCO now, you're a non-commissioned officer. So they usually try to give you your own space. But sometimes if there's kind of a lot of people in the barracks, then they may not have the room to be able to do that. So it may be temporarily where you have to kind of share with another non-commissioned officer until the room does open up and they can move that other NCO out of that room and then you go back to having your own space. Now for that sergeant kind of case that I was mentioning, I only mentioned E5 and E6 because E7s do not live in the barracks. They will be able to get that BAH, that BAS, that extra money, that extra pay to be able to get a place off post to get their own apartment. So E7s and above, even if you're single, you're going to get your own place off post, or you can get on post housing if you have that available type of thing, but you won't be living in the barracks. So that's even better. There are some situations where E6s might also get that. Most commonly when I've seen that being the case, it's because the barracks are over full. They're over capacity. There's a lot of single soldiers living in that unit in those barracks type of thing, and they need to free up some rooms for some of the lower enlisted soldiers. So the highest ranking individuals is going to be the ones that they're going to kind of get them out of the barracks, and they're going to allow those E6s to receive BAH and BAS so that they can get out of the barracks, free up those rooms for some of the lower enlisted soldiers. But again, only kind of situation I've seen that for E6 is usually when the barracks are over capacity. Now, kind of tying into the barracks one, you get treated more as an adult when you're a non-commissioned officer compared to when you're that lower enlisted soldier. Using the barracks as the example, if you are a E4 and below living in the barracks, you probably have like room inspections, you got health and welfare, you got non-commissioned officers that are wanting to know what your plans are for the weekends. Whereas when you're an E5 and above, let's say E5 or E6 living in the barracks, you don't have those same room inspections. If they have like a barracks-wide room inspection, then sure, you might still fall into that. But you don't have like the platoon sergeants checking on you in the morning or your squad leaders checking on the non-commissioned officers in the morning to see how they're kind of living. They're kind of going away from that in the Army, like today's Army, where they don't do it as often as they used to type of thing, where it was like an every morning thing. Now it's just kind of periodically here and there. But now that still even makes it to where it's even less as a non-commissioned officer. So you get treated more like an adult. You don't have people always constantly wanting to check on how you're living inside of your room. It's more on you. You're an adult. You should be taking care of yourself type of thing. We're not going to have other people checking on you. Whereas those lower enlisted soldiers, you do have those non-commissioned officers that are coming to check on you to see how you're living. Also with a lot of other things, right? Even like TA-50 inspection, which is your Army gear, all your Army equipment. Usually before you go to the field, you might have like a TA-50 layout where you do an inspection of all your gear to make sure you've got everything that you need for that field problem coming up. And you'll have all the soldiers lay out all their gear, and then non-commissioned officers, squad leaders, platoon sergeant, whoever, will come around to check to see if they have what they're supposed to have and it's serviceable and all that stuff. Whereas when you're a non-commissioned officer, they just kind of rely on you being an adult and making sure you have the right equipment when you go off to the field, so that way you're already ready to go. So you won't usually be participating in those inspections you have to do. Sometimes you will, but I've seen it often a lot of times where you're a non-commissioned officer, you're an adult, you should know better, right? Even though lower enlisted soldiers, 18 and older, right, they should be adults too, but you're just not treated like that when you're an E4 and below. Now, a lot of these kind of made it sound like, some of the NCO stuff is better compared to lower enlisted soldiers, but this next one is actually kind of the opposite way, because when you're a non-commissioned officer, when you're a sergeant, you actually sometimes get in trouble for things that the lower enlisted soldiers do. If you are, let's say, E5, E6, you're a squad leader, section sergeant, something along those lines, and you've got a private that makes some kind of mistake, messes up, they're not where they're supposed to be, that first sergeant, that platoon sergeant, is probably going to yell at you for it. The other person's going to kind of get in trouble. That's where the term, the shit rolls downhill kind of comes in, where, the platoon sergeant yells at you yell at the soldier type of thing because it's all rolling downhill. But that's just how it is, right? When you're a non-commissioned officer, the soldier's mistakes are sometimes labeled as your mistakes too, even though sometimes you don't have any control over, preventing that soldier to do so. For whatever reason, it just ends up being that way because they expect you to somehow educate that soldier better or check on that soldier better to make sure they don't do this mistake in the first place. So you have Private Joe Snuffy or whatever that was supposed to be at this building at 9 o'clock and they weren't there on time, and they find out about that. They're going to go to that first line supervisor. Someone's going to be like, hey, who's your first line supervisor? Why weren't you here on time? So they just assume that maybe you didn't tell them the right place, you didn't tell them the right time, whatever. They're going to come to you, be like, they're going to yell at you. Why was Private Joe Snuffy not at this building at 9 o'clock like they were supposed to be? So then it very feels like you're in trouble for them being late. And then you have to kind of reflect that over onto that soldier to be like, hey, why weren't you there at 9 o'clock? But that's kind of a negative one on the non-commissioned officer side. You know, sergeant and above, when you have soldiers messing up, you sometimes feel the wrath of them messing up. Now, one last one for the differences between being a sergeant and a private type of thing is the taskings, right? When you're a lower enlisted soldier, you're going to be stuck quite often with some really crappy taskings. That could be crappy literally, like you have to clean up the bathroom and maybe it's really disgusting. You may have to go mow lawns, you may have to go pick up trash, you may have to go do some kind of guard duties, things that a lot of people usually don't want to do. Those taskings are usually be handed down to those lower enlisted soldiers type of thing, because when you're a non-commissioned officer, you're more of a supervisor. So you should be above and beyond that kind of lifestyle now. So when they need someone to go clean up this bathroom because someone had explosive diarrhea that's all over the wall, they're going to make some private or some lower enlisted soldier that probably maybe has been screwing up anyways or something along those lines go clean up that mess. They're not going to go and tell like the NCOs to go do that. They're not going to go tell some first sergeants, some platoon sergeant, something like that to go clean up that bathroom. There might be some cases where that happens, but for the most part, the ideal person they're going to go to is those E4 and belows to do those crappy taskings. Now, some people might argue that, you know, oh, well, when you become a sergeant, you become an NCO, you just get different crappy taskings. And sometimes that does happen. Like you might get stuck being sergeant of the guard. Maybe it's outside, it's freezing cold outside. You've got a couple of lower enlisted soldiers that are your guards and you have to be in charge of those guards and you're outside too. So you kind of get stuck in that way with some different crappy taskings, but nonetheless, it's still not the same level as those E4 and belows are getting. Now, my individuals out there, whether you are currently in the Army, maybe you're a veteran type of thing, if you're a lower enlisted, you're a non-commissioned officer type of thing, I want to hear in the comments down below from you guys, what are some of the differences that you've noticed, of differences between when, you know, a soldier is in that private lifestyle, that E4 and below lifestyle, compared to when they're in that E5 and above lifestyle? What are some of the differences that you've noticed? I want to hear about them down in the comment section down below, whether you were not an NCO and you were just E4 and below, maybe you stayed in the E4 Mafia, or maybe you did make it up to E5 or beyond type of thing. What are some of your experiences that you've seen some of those differences in? Now, a shout out to my elite members, the little members showing up down below. If you would like to become a member at any of the different tiers, there's some different levels that you can get to be able to get some different perks like early access to videos and all sorts of fun stuff. So check out the join button down below to see what perks are available. But related to this video, if you want to learn about like what do soldiers do when they're a private, what do soldiers do when they're a specialist as a first sergeant, all of that stuff, I actually have a video right here that you can check out and you can watch and learn all about it right here. So click on that video, go watch it, thumbs up, hit that subscribe, all that fun stuff. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for watching, guys. I'm Christopher Chaos, and I'll see you next time. See ya.